Hi everyone. So what I'd like to start off with today is to just bring to your attention this Erratum Notice. So this is the second Erratum Notice issued by OCR for the F585 Global Economy paper, and it refers to figure 4.2, which is on page 10 of your extract. You will find, if you go to the OCR website, they have published a new figure 4.2, and the data in the third and final column for the year 2011 has been amended. So it's worth your while going to the OCR website. So if you search on Google for OCR GCE Economics, go to the F585 pre-release material section, it would be worth your while printing out a new copy of the pre-release material, or at least a new copy of page 10. It says on this Erratum Notice that amended and updated copies of the pre-release material will not be sent to centres, so you need to get a copy of that for yourself. And you can see a copy of the new and amended figure here. So this is the new figure 4.2. It does make quite a lot of difference to our analysis and interpretation of not only figure 4.2, but how we might interpret a question on this particular paper. So do be looking out for that. And indeed, that's what I'd like to do next. I'd like to maybe just go through figure 4 once again, deal with all of these figures in turn, and then consider some potential questions for this particular extract. So if we go to the start of extract 4, you'll see there's reference made here to the WTO's 2013 World Trade Report. If you are interested, and bear in mind it is simply if you're interested, you will not need to have in-depth knowledge of this World Trade Report, but if you are interested, if you Google WTO World Trade Report 2013 PDF, this first link here will take you to said document. It's about 300 and something pages long, so you will not be expected to have an in-depth knowledge of it. However, there is one very invaluable quote from it which refers to our new data in figure 4.2. And I'm quoting here from it, and the quote is this. It says, "Developing nations have raised their collective share of world trade by trading with one another." Now you can see in figure 4.2 for 2011, the key changes here are, number one, trade between developed countries has fallen and has consistently fallen over time, and very interestingly, the other key change is trade between developing countries, which is this little section here, has pretty much doubled from around about 12% in 2000 to 24% in 2011. And I'll say a little bit more about that when we have gone back over these charts. So what I'd like to do then is to start from the beginning again of our analysis of extract 4, and so let me just present to you the first set of data which we're asked to consider, which you are asked to consider in this particular extract. And that's it. So let me just zoom in on this one so we can have a good look at it. Whoops. So this is figure 4.1. You'll be familiar with this anyway. And the key things really to note from this one are as follows. First of all, this particular figure is suggesting to us that perhaps the slowdown in the rate of world trade growth is possibly due to a slowdown in growth in world trade in general. You can see from this data that the growth in the developed economies, 1.2%, very weak really. The newly industrialized Asian economies at 1.8% is still really, relatively speaking, that's quite weak. Now those countries, the Asian economies, would include Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Japan again below 2% and the USA just slightly above at 2.3%. So in the developed world, growth is quite feeble, it's relatively weak. But we can see quite strong growth in Africa and China. Africa at 9.3% and China at 7.8%. Now of course you might think to yourselves, well, why did the developed nations not trade more with these emerging market economies like Africa and China? But one must bear in mind that these countries are relatively poor if we consider their GDP per capita numbers. GDP per capita in Africa of $1,600 US, GDP in China $7,000 US, compared to our own GDP per capita of $41,000. And that does not put these developing nations in a strong position when it comes to purchasing goods and services from the developed world. The other thing to remember is of course that China is still very much under communist rule and government control, and it is a relatively closed economy still. It's opening up of course, and that is a gradual process, but it is still relatively closed economy. And China obviously enhances its own position, some would say, by deliberately manipulating its exchange rate, making the exchange rate weak and therefore enhancing its export potential. I think that's all there is to say really on figure 4.1. So let's now have a look at the new figure 4.2. So let me just check that that's in view for you. This is our new figure 4.2, subject to the Erratum Notice, and hopefully there won't be any amendments to this. So what can we glean from this? Well, in 1990 and 2000 we have two main trade flows, as you can see. Trade between developed countries and trade between the developed and the developing countries. And really this Erratum Notice has thrown in some new and enlightening data, because we now see that trade between developed countries has fallen from 50% in the year 2000 to 36% in 2011. Trade between developed and developing countries has grown, should I say, from about 36% to 38%. And the real sort of spanner in the works that have been thrown here is that trade between developing countries has now gone from 12% to 24%. And that's the key significant change here. And I refer you once again to the quote from the World Trade Report, which said developing nations have raised their collective share of world trade by trading with one another. They've raised themselves up not by trading more with the developed world, but by trading more with one another. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very interesting point to develop later. Let's now consider figure 4.3. So this is the old figure 4.2, so let's not worry about that too much. Now let's consider this one, so figure 4.3. Now I have displayed this one before, but the quality of the presentation wasn't particularly great. So hopefully you'll be able to see this one a little bit better. I'll try and zoom in on a few of these and we can just pick up on a few points. What I've actually done is I've cropped them out of the pre-release and just put them side by side just to try and make it that little bit easier to interpret the data. I'm not really sure if it's that beneficial, to be honest, but we can have a look at it in this fashion. So if we look here in North America, for example, you can see at the top of each of these I've put percentage is. Now those percentages relate to the increase, that is the increase in the US billion-dollar values. So for example, in North America in 1990 we have a value of 548 billion US dollars, and in 2011 we have a figure of 2,282 billion US dollars, or 2.2 trillion US dollars. And if you work out the percentage increase there, that is a 316.4% increase. Doing the same for the Middle East, it's an 806.7% increase. The same for the CIS is a 1,260.3% increase. The same for Asia is a 649.4% increase. The same for Europe is 283.4% increase. And if I just move down now and we can have a look at Africa and Southern and Central America. So Africa is a 460.4% increase, and South and Central America a 525.0% increase. Now if we consider all of this data as a whole, I think the exam board are now suggesting to us that perhaps the changes in world trade and world trade output, perhaps that's maybe down to the formation of trading blocks, and the fact that countries excuse me, the fact that countries are now trading more within the blocks. In other words, the intra-regional trade is becoming more and more significant and important. That's in both absolute terms and in relative terms. So the grey bars for each of those countries, with the exception of Europe, where it goes from, let me see that, it goes from 35% to 29% for intra-regional trade, but everywhere else it's an increase in intra-regional trade. We can see that Asia is a very significant player here, because if you look at the billion-dollar total for Asia, let me just zoom in on that, it's 5.5, it's about 5.5 trillion. Now that is an enormous number, and indeed it's larger than Europe's, which is 2.7, added to North America's, which is 2.282. So very significant player the Asian market here. Now the interesting thing is, we've been presented with new data for figure 4.2, and so it might be the case that we might want to link in what's going on in figure 4.3 with figure 4.2. It's clear that over time, trading within the blocks is becoming more and more significant and more important. And we've seen in figure 4.2 that developing nations are growing by trading more amongst themselves rather than with the developed world. Now if you look at Africa and Southern and Central America, which I guess would be the developing nations that we'd be talking about here, if you work out 6% of 106 gives you 71.28 billion. No, that's wrong. If you work out 6% of 106 gives you 6.3 billion. Then if you work out the new increased value of 12%, that gives you a value of 71.28 billion. So quite a significant rise in trade intra-regionally, in other words with other developing nations. If you do the same for South and Central America, so we're working out about 14% of 120 gives us 16.8 billion. That then rises to, it's difficult to see this, it rises to 26% of 750 billion, which is $195 billion. So it's gone from $16.8 billion to $195 billion. Now therein we are showing that trade between developing nations has increased quite significantly, and this is what we are shown in figure 4.2 in the new data for 2011. I'll just zoom in on the points to the right hand side here. I have done a video on this before, which you'll be able to find somewhere in my on my page. So I'll just zoom into these before, and if you want a little bit more detail on them, do consult what we have considered before, but these are the sort of the general points that we made previously. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there, and the next video will be with regard to figure 4.5 and then potential questions for this extract 4. I think it's probably the most difficult one to predict the questions for, but we can have a good go at it. So see you next time.